was born in Framingham,
Mm-hmm.
1925.
Your parents were born over in Italy?
Yeah,
Where?
Piacenza.
Up in the mountains?
No, up in the northern section
Mm.
of Italy.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. When I was I just got through my junior year in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and before I could start my senior year, I was drafted
Mm-hmm.
in the service. And when I was having my physical in the service, I had all intentions of joining the Marines, you know.
Yeah.
But when I was in Boston taking my physical and everything, I was in line, and there was a guy in front of me who said, "I'm not going to no army." He says, "I want to sleep in a bed. I'm not going to sleep on the ground, you know."
Yeah.
So that hit me, you know. So I said to myself, well, you know, the Marines are the same way as the Army, so maybe I should go in the Navy. So I decided to go in the Navy. And I ended up going to boot camp in Newport on Coaster Island.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for a few weeks until, you know, I graduated from there, and they sent me home for a leave, 12-day leave. And of course, when taking the exams and everything else, they asked me what I wanted to go, what part of the Navy I wanted to go into. So I said I wanted to go into the airplane part, you know. I had three choices.
Mm-hmm.
And the first choice was maintenance, aviation maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
And the second choice was armed guard.
Mm-hmm.
It was like being on a supply ship and manning the guns on it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third choice was anything, you know. Well, anyway, when I graduated, they told me that I was going to go to Oklahoma,
Mm-hmm.
Norman, Oklahoma, to aviation maintenance school. And they gave me tickets and everything for the railroad, and I was to leave on a certain day, and blah, blah, blah. And
Mm-hmm.
while I was home on the 12-day leave, I get a thing in the mail from the Navy saying, ignore going to Norman, Oklahoma, go back to Newport after my leave was over. So I said I went back, and then they told me you've been assigned to a new ship. So you're going to Boston, and you're going to go in the Fargo building in Boston. And you're going to be on the third or fourth floor. The whole crew to this ship is going to be there. 1,700 guys. You know. I didn't even know what the ship was, you know, but it was being built at the shipyard in Fall River. And I went to the Fargo building, and I was in the Fargo building for 3 months.
Yeah.
Till this ship came out of Fall River and tied up in Boston, and they put me on it. And I had to be sworn in and everything else. And I'm called what they call a plank owner, because I was on it from the day they commissioned it. And it was the USS Quincy, heavy cruiser. So, you know, we were there for a few weeks until we got acquainted with everything we had to do and what we were supposed to do and everything, you know. And then we went on a shakedown cruise. and went to Trinidad down in the Caribbean. And when we hit Cape Hatteras in North Carolina, I got sick as a dog, seasick, because it's where the Gulf Stream turns, and it was a storm at the time. And I'll never forget that we had spaghetti for supper that night, and there was spaghetti all over the place. You know, everybody was getting sick and whatever, right? But anyway, after the shakedown cruise, we went, we were in Boston, and there was rumored on the ship that we were going to an invasion in Europe. Next thing you know, we take off one morning from Boston, and we join a big convoy going over to, and we got to England. They decided to go to Scotland and Ireland and England. In fact, when I was up in Scotland, I had Liberty there, and we met a couple of English waves. They're women in the English army, I guess. And they brought us to a party in a castle. And it was very interesting. The castle was, because it still had the dungeons in it. It had stretch tables and stuff like that on it. Where they tortured and whatever. And anyway, after England and everything else, some of the convoys that were going to go in the invasion was stationed there, and prepared for the Normandy invasion. So anyway, that morning, June 5th, I think it was, we took off and we started across the channel, and we got to Normandy, Utah Beach and everything, and we started firing there. We fired close to 1,000 rounds of 8-inch shells, which weigh almost 300 and some odd pounds. And also there was about 500 or 600 5-inch that was fired there too. And we were there for 19 days. We were taking dead people out of the water and then putting them in canvas bags and putting a shell in it, so that they would sink, and gave them a decent burial, at sea, We did that to quite a few, And of course, some of the experiences there was, some of them were so bad that when they were pulling them up the side of the ship, they had tied them up. They would pull them up tight, they were falling apart. Liver, heart, everything was just hanging there, It wasn't very nice. So after 19 days, they took us out of there and they sent us to Cherbourg, which was a deep water port on the Atlantic side. And we went in there first, with a battleship and a couple of English cruisers and a bunch of destroyers. We went in there 34 knots, 35 knots, and firing. And there was an interesting thing that happened there. 35 years later in Saxonville, Massachusetts, I met a guy that was in the German army there at the time that this was going on. He was a German cook, and he had a trailer and a truck, and he used to cook for 125 Germans. And when we went in there and started firing and everything else, blew his truck up, blew his kitchen up, blew everything up. I even spotted a German on a motorcycle go up, you know, and the piers and everything, you know, all being bombarded and everything, you know. And there was a big 14-inch shell that landed near the front of the ship, but away, and the thing didn't explode until it went down under the bow of the ship. And when it blew, it lifted us out of the water and everything, but it didn't do any damage as far as we knew, you know. But when we got back to Boston, we got into dry dock, there was a big dent. You know, they had to fix that. But anyway, we left there and went back to Plymouth, England, and went in. They had a bay there. They had a big barge, 2 or 3 barges anchored there that had ammunition on them in the middle of the bay, and we reloaded and everything, and then we went to the Mediterranean Sea. We went to Oran, Africa, and the temperature there was like 114 in the sun and everything, you know, and it was quite a, you know, in the area to see, you know, for sightseeing. You know, it took a beating during the Casablanca invasion, you know, when they invaded there. But anyway, we tied up to what they call a water breaker, and there was entertainment groups from the States that came over, and they started to entertain on this water breaker, but it didn't get to us yet. And we were told to leave. We had, you know, went to Palermo, Sicily, and I went ashore there, and, you know, had a 4-hour liberty and everything. You know, the Germans had just gone through a couple of weeks before they were leaving, when they were leaving, you know. The southern French invasion started from there, you know. We went, and we were dueling with a big 14-inch German shore battery. They kept firing at us, kept missing us and everything, but every time they fired at us, we fired back, you know. We finally knocked it out, you know. We had a fort over there that gave up to us. They waved a white flag, don't shoot anymore, because we're blasting everything, you know. We left there, you know, we came back to the States. We landed in Norfolk, Virginia, and they installed an elevator on the superstructure of our ship on the side of it. And that gave us a thing that we were going to bring President Roosevelt over to the Yalta Conference. Everything was very secretive. He came on the ship at night. They had strung up canvas blinds and everything all over the place so nobody could see what was going on. But the president came on with his daughter, stayed in the captain's quarters, and we had also a half a dozen FBI men. And we started to cross the Atlantic. And we were going pretty fast and zigzagging all the way over, because I guess the Germans knew something was going on, and they sent their submarines and everything after it. When we got to the entrance to Gibraltar and everything, there was all kinds of activities, of planes flying around, you know. There were destroyers all over the place, you know, and we were right in the middle of it, zigzagging, going, you know, over 30 some odd knots, which is over 40 miles an hour. And we got into the Mediterranean, and we went to Malta, and we pulled into the harbor, Valletta, Malta. And he left the ship there, and by plane flew to the Yalta Conference. He and his daughter and the FBI and several officials that went with him. They came over in other ships, you know. And we left Valletta, Malta, and went down the Suez Canal to the Great Bitter Lake, which there was a private beach there that King Farouk used to use. He was the king of Egypt at the time. They don't have a king anymore, you know. But there were a couple of English, Italian battleships that were anchored down there that had been captured. We were there for a few days. I don't know how many days. But all the dignitaries came on. King Farouk came on the ship. He was the king of Egypt. There was also King Ibn Saud of Saudi Arabia. He came on the ship with his 6 sons. They were all jeweled. And he also had live sheep that they had on the destroyer Murphy. Went up after him because it was too shallow. We couldn't go up there, you know. He came aboard, you know, from the Murphy, the USS Murphy, and they used to slaughter their own lamb on the rear of the ship, you know. And that's the only thing they would eat. It had to be freshly slaughtered, you know. Haile Selassie of Ethiopia came on the ship. He was a little guy, a little shock. You'd think he was just a little bit bigger than a midget, you know. He had high heels on and stuff, you know. But he was one of the officials of Ethiopia, and he came on the ship. And there were a few other big dignitaries. One of the generals died while they were at the conference in Yalta, and they transported him back to our ship. And we had a guy that was the son of a undertaker. He was in the pharmaceutical part of the ship. He drained the blood out of him and pushed formaldehyde into him and whatever. And then they put him, they built a box, the carpenters on the ship built a box. They put him in the box and they shoved him in one of the empty refrigerator storerooms we had, you know, till we got back to the States. When the conference was finally all over, Roosevelt came back. We left there, came back to the States, the same way we went there. High speed and zigzagging all over the place. We came back to the States and we thought we were going to get a leave. We didn't get a leave. 3 freight cars came on the pier and we unloaded them and stored them on our ship. And they shipped us to the Pacific.